Imagine this, there is a bride who has a beautiful wedding dress. She is so excited to wear that dress. She decides not to wait until the wedding day. She's going to wear it to the wedding rehearsal. Now, I know that's out there a little bit, but just roll with me on this, okay? So there she is. She's at the wedding rehearsal. She's got her shoes on. She's got her beautiful wedding dress. And she is not concerned whatsoever about the fact that the groom is going to see her before the wedding day in her dress. She's there. She's happy. Everything goes great. It's a beautiful rehearsal. It's going to be a wonderful ceremony the next day. After the rehearsal, she stays in her wedding dress and goes to the rehearsal dinner. Did I mention that they're serving Italian food at the rehearsal dinner? Yeah, so partway through the dinner, boom, things go bad. Big spaghetti sauce stain right there on the front. It's not a little stain, it's a huge stain. It's right there, front and center. Over the next few minutes, there's a flurry of activity. Some people are Googling, how do you get spaghetti sauce out of a dress? Others are offering wet wipes and stain stick type stuff to try everything, but it's all to no avail. There is no removing this stain from the dress. They got it a little bit lighter, but that's it. I mean, it is there. It is obvious. There's no way that this is going to come out. Nothing can be done. Yeah. Is the dress ruined? Well, no, I mean, it still clothes her, but is it ruined for its intended purpose? Yeah, it sure is. Hang on to that thought because we're going to come back to that idea. So we're in a series in the first half of the book of Mark, and this is part 6 in our series. Today we're going to look at Mark chapter 7, and where we're going to see Jesus address a challenge that we all face. So let's just jump into it. I'm in Mark chapter 7, beginning at verse 1. The Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him. They observed that some of his disciples were eating bread with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, keeping the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they've washed. And there are many other customs they have received and keep, like the washing of cups, pitchers, kettles, and dining couches. So, the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating bread with ceremonially unclean hands?" Now, there are two issues here in this text and then in the next several verses. The first is the breaking of the traditions taught by the elders. And Jesus will address that in verses 6 to 13, but I'm not going to talk about that issue today. The second issue is this issue of becoming defiled. And Jesus addressed that in verses 14 to 23. And I am going to talk about that because it's an issue that we all face, even though we don't realize it probably on the front end. So that's the part we're going to focus in on today. Now, back to verse 2, where it says unclean hands in the CSB. If you had an NIV or an ESV version of the Bible, you read the words defiled hands. Or if you use the NASB, it's impure hands. Now, we're not talking about unsanitary hands. We're talking about ceremonial uncleanness in these verses. Defiled hands. So what is this issue of defiled? What does that mean? Well, defiled in the Bible means it's polluted. It's unholy, right? It's therefore not acceptable to God. There's something wrong with it. It's been ruined. Figuratively, you'll see the word defiled used with another word, often stained. If something's not defiled, it's spotless, but if it is defiled, it's stained. Like that wedding dress that I talked about a minute ago, it's stained, and therefore it is ruined for its intended purposes. Oh yeah, you can still wear the dress, it's still modest, it still covers everything, right? But you don't want to wear it to your wedding day because, well, it's just going to call attention to the stain instead of calling attention to the beautiful bride, right? So that's the idea. Defiled, it's polluted, it's unholy, and therefore it's not acceptable to God, and there are consequences of all of that. So I get it. This idea of defilement, something becoming defiled, or this kind of impurity, that might seem kind of strange to us. It's not part of our culture like it was for the Jews. And that's really significant. I want to point out to us that God designed Jewish culture to help them have a head start at understanding spiritual realities. I mean, God literally built a culture in order to communicate the message that he wanted for us. Because anytime you communicate a message, the culture can distort that message. We perceive things through the culture in which we live. And so God, amazingly so, decided, I'm going to create a culture so I can communicate certain spiritual realities with mankind. And so he called out a man named Abram, told him to leave his family, leave his country, leave his culture. And then through that man, God created a family and eventually a nation, also that he could accurately communicate some things to humanity through a culture designed by God. The reality of defilement is one of those things. It's a real thing that God wanted communicated to us, and so he created this Jewish culture to help make that possible so we could understand it. Now, in creating this culture, God made a covenant with them that included laws against certain foods and certain situations that made someone unclean. And there are at least 3 reasons for these types of laws, these unclean laws or these defilement laws. And I'm not going to get into that today. We talked about that when we talked about the Old Covenant. The point is this. There are these laws. And if you touch the wrong thing, or you eat the wrong thing, or you go to the wrong place or whatever, you were ceremonially unclean. You were defiled. If you broke that law, you're defiled, you're no longer pure, and you're no longer acceptable to God while you're in that state. Sacrifice was necessary in order to restore your purity and to restore your ability to interact both with your neighbors around you, the other people, and with God. So God created this culture, created some of these laws, good reasons for that, but that's really what that was all about. And a sacrifice is necessary to fix the problem if you became defiled. Okay? Now, so defilement is a little strange to us because that's not part of our culture. There's another thing that might seem a little strange to us that I want to address before we get into the rest of the text, and that is this. For some of us, we might think, isn't it strange that God might not accept somebody? I mean, isn't God obligated to love and therefore accept everyone? Oh, wow. Rather than answer that question head on, I want to have you, again, use your imagination with me for just a moment. Imagine that there's this world-class chef, and he makes unbelievable food, great meals, gourmet food. It's just incredible. But he also likes his food just so, right? And so he tends to use more expensive foods, higher quality ingredients, and with him, presentation matters, and he prefers sauces beyond just the American sauce, right? Melted cheese, right? You could say, if he's like that, and so you put something else in front of him, and he's like, I'm not going to eat that. Well, then you'd say, well, you're just being fussy. You're being picky. Come back down to earth. Eat with the rest of us. A cheeseburger is just fine, or whatever. But imagine that same world-class chef if he just says, I'm not going to eat this food because this food is just crawling with disease-carrying flies. I mean, they're just all over. And so to eat this is a recipe for getting extremely sick, possibly dying. Well, if he rejects that food, he's not being picky anymore, is he? No, he's avoiding real contaminants. There's a real reason. There's something really wrong with this food, and he should avoid it, right? The defilement that Jesus talked about in the next few verses we're going to look at has nothing to do with God being picky. It has everything to do with God saying these things defile you because they are real contaminants. They cause real damage, real disease. There's something really wrong here. All right? So let's jump into the text. Mark chapter 7, verse 14. Summoning the crowd again, Jesus told them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. Gather around. I've got something important to tell you, right? Here it is, verse 15. Nothing that goes into a person from outside can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. That was it. Nothing that goes into a person from the outside can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. Now, several observations. First, that word defile there is the same word that was back in verse 2 that was translated unclean or unwashed. It's that exactly the same word, defile. So we're talking about the same thing, but we're no longer talking about defiled hands. We're talking about a defiled person. In other words, it's not just your hand that gets defiled now, your entire personhood gets defiled. And then, as you saw in the verse we just read, Jesus states what does and what does not defile the person. So a couple takeaways so far. First, defilement is a real thing. If you read the verses that I skipped, they were a lot about tradition and cultural rules. And so you might walk away from those verses and think, well, maybe defilement isn't a real issue. No, it really is. This is not just a tradition thing. It's not just a cultural rule. Defilement is a real thing. And secondly, defilement is a real problem. See, things that are defiled or people that are defiled, well, that messes with stuff. It messes with their relationships with God and with other people. And defilement is also a real problem because just like the whole spaghetti sauce on the wedding dressing, defilement ruins us for our intended purposes. So defilement is a real thing, and it is a problem, and it is one that we experience, whether we know that or not. It's our challenge that's in our lives. Let's look at what happens next. Mark 7, verse 17. When he went into the house, away from the crowd, his disciples asked him about the parable. Yeah, that sentence we just read. And he said to them, are you also as lacking in understanding? Don't you realize that nothing going into a person from the outside can defile him? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into the stomach and is eliminated. And Jesus said, defilement doesn't come from outside a person. It doesn't come through your association, like if you hang out with this person, boom, or you're somehow associated with them, or you're part of something. No, that's not how you get defiled. And you don't get defiled through proximity, being too close to. And you don't get defiled through contact, like by touching. And you don't even get defiled through ingestion, by eating. Well, why not? Because none of those methods bring the unclean thing into contact with the heart. None of those methods corrupt the heart. Now, when the Bible talks about heart, it's not talking about the organ, boom, 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 boom. It's talking about the core of your being, that part of you that determines your actions and your inactions. It includes your will, the decision-making part of you. It includes your values. It includes your priorities, your reinforced thoughts, perhaps your adopted identity. So the core of who you are, what makes you you and what makes you do what you do and not do what you won't do, that's your heart. And he says, defilement doesn't come from the outside because there's nothing you can touch and no person you can be around and nothing you can eat that'll actually change your heart, the core of your being. Now, before we get to the rest of what Jesus said, Mark, you might notice, added an application to Jesus' words. Let me go back to it again. It's the second half of verse 18. Nothing going into a person from the outside can defile him, for it doesn't go into his heart, but into the stomach and is eliminated. Thanks for not making me explain that. Thus he declared all foods clean. This is mind-blowing. Jesus often said a lot with very few words. And with these few words, right, nothing going into a person can defile him because it just goes in the stomach and is eliminated. With those few words, Jesus removed the dietary restrictions for his followers. The old covenant laws that had these dietary restrictions, like don't eat shellfish and don't eat pork, right? Those were gone. So guys, Christ followers can eat bacon. That's awesome. That's really great. All right, verse 20. And he said to them, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of people's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immoralities, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a person. So defilement comes from within a person, from a polluted heart and a polluted will. The wrong thoughts, the wrong values, the wrong decisions that we make lead to defilement, and they lead to evil behaviors. Now, note that these verses, 21 and 22, this is not an exhaustive list. In other words, these are not the only things that defile us. They're representative. They're a listing of some evil thought patterns and some sinful actions. Because the point isn't Jesus trying to give us a list of everything. The point he's trying to make is it comes from within. As I read through that list, I thought, we might be shocked by some of the things that are on the list that don't seem really all that bad. Don't seem all that ruining, destructive, like self-indulgence or foolishness. Like, whoa, that made the list. But let me ask you, do these heart conditions, does self-indulgence, an attitude that says, I deserve all the good things in my life and I deserve even more, so I deserve to have it my way, I deserve to eat what I want when I want it, I deserve to not have to put up with what I don't want to put up with, I deserve to eat as much as I want. Does that kind of an attitude contaminate a life? Can it ruin it for its intended purpose? Can it put that person at odds with God and with other people? Yes. Yes and yes again. What about the other one? Foolishness. Foolishness in the Bible is when we know what to do and we're like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do that. I don't care. I'm concerned about the consequences. I'm going to do what I want. Can that mentality, that heart attitude, I'm going to do what I want. I know what's right, but I'm not going to do it. Can that contaminate a life? Well, yeah. Will it ruin it for its intended purpose? Absolutely. A person who won't do what's right will never live out the purpose for which God created that person. Will it put him at odds with God? Well, yes, of course. And will a foolish person be at odds with other people? Yes. Yes, of course. He's defiled by his foolishness. So, defilement starts on the inside of a person. And then next, not stated in this verse, but clearly stated elsewhere in the Bible, defilement can only be fixed by a change on the inside. Right? If it starts on the inside, it can only be fixed on the inside. But that immediately shows us we've got two big problems, because only a new heart will change a person on the inside. And only God can give a person a new heart. There's no therapy you can go through. There's no behavioral change or new habit or good deed you can do or some charitable gift you can make or some improved mindset you can do that will solve your defilement problem, because none of those things truly change the heart. Second, our defilement makes us incompatible with God. So here I am, I'm a person who I need heart surgery, if you will, from God, and yet God shouldn't touch us. That was the point with defilement. When you were defiled, you shouldn't be touched by anyone else. You shouldn't be with them until you take care of this defilement. But our defilement is a problem that we can't solve on our own. We need a new heart, but we can't do our own heart surgery, and we don't have a new heart to put in it. Even if I could do our own heart surgery, only God can do all that, and he shouldn't touch us because we're defiled. This is bleak, but it doesn't end there. Because the Bible also makes it clear that Jesus is willing and able to solve our defilement problem. See, with God, it's different. With humans, when they are defiled and they interact with other humans, right, their defilement, their sin, their bad, that stuff spreads or whatever, at least according to the old covenant. But with God, it's different. When he touches us, our defilement doesn't spread to him. His purity spreads to us. That's not a thought that's original with me. I read it somewhere. I just don't remember where, but I love it. When he touches us, our defilement doesn't spread to Jesus. His purity spreads to us. And second, God didn't let defilement stop him from coming and living among people and even touching them. He broke, if you will, the ceremonial cleanliness rules. I was reading in a commentary on Mark by Strauss and Wessel, and they made this statement: Jesus freely eats with tax collectors and sinners in contexts where the food was unlikely to be kosher, but that didn't let him stop. That didn't stop him. And he has no qualms about touching a leper, chapter 1, verse 41. And he had no qualms about touching the corpse of Jairus' daughter or a hemorrhaging woman, all actions that in Judaism would have rendered him ceremonially unclean. It's as if he was willing to sort of break those rules in order to be with us, among us, and touch us, and heal us. In the very next chapter of Mark, we find that Jesus purposely traveled into an area that everyone around him, all the Jews, would have considered to be completely defiled, so that he could preach the good news. Jesus cares about us. Let me make it more personal. Jesus cares about you. And Jesus doesn't let your impurity keep him from coming to you. And he isn't worried about you rubbing off on him. Jesus cares about you. Jesus cares about your purity. He cares about your purity. He wants to fix your self-pollution problem by starting at the source. He wants to fix our defilement problem, your defilement problem, my defilement problem by starting at the source. He isn't about to let you persist in self-deception or self-righteousness, and so he comes to you and says, listen, you have a problem. Not just defiled hands. You're a defiled person because of what's gone on and come out of your heart. And then he promises a new heart and a change from the inside out to those who are willing to believe in him. As Dallas Willard says, Jesus is making you into a person who naturally does the right thing. And Jesus gave his own life to make it happen. That's what the second half of the book of Mark is all about. Jesus came like a physician to heal the sick. We talked about that in part 1. But at the cost of his own life. That's what it took to solve our defilement problem. If this is resonating with your heart, if as I'm talking about this, there's something within you that's just captivated by this, that's God. He is touching your heart. He's convincing you of truth. He's offering you his purity. And the only appropriate thing is, I think, is to respond to him, to have a conversation with him and say, God, I want you to fix my defilement problem. Or maybe you're already a follower of Jesus Christ, and so he's done the big thing. He already gave you that new heart, but you want to look at him and you want to say, Jesus, Jesus, continue to do your work in me. Continue to change me from the inside out so that slowly but surely I become that person who naturally does the right thing. Jesus, keep doing what you started. Man, if that's your heart, I encourage you, just pause and talk to God and silently, right there, right where you're at, talk to him about what's going on in your heart and your desire to see him do what only he can do. When I was serving as a missionary in Portugal, sometimes Americans would ask me, what foods do I miss while I'm living in Portugal? My answer was ham, sausage, and bacon. I know it's all pig meat, ham, sausage, and bacon, but I couldn't get any of those things there in Portugal. They don't have cured ham. They make a kind of sausage, but it's not like breakfast sausage here. And they have a thing called bacon, but it's more of a kind of a lunch meat thing, and it doesn't taste anything like our bacon here. You don't fry it. It's not crispy, none of that. So that's what I missed. I loved the food in Portugal, but I missed ham, sausage, and bacon. And I remember telling somebody that one day when they asked me, what did I miss while living there? And they said to me, Andy, you need to go back to Portugal because someone's got to preach the good news in Portugal that bacon has come to the world and we are allowed to eat it. Yeah, That's good news. Jesus followers are allowed to eat bacon, and I like it. I don't eat a ton of it, but I do like it. That declaration that we read about today, that all foods are clean, that's good news. That's good news. It's all on the menu. But the declaration that Jesus is willing and able to make you clean and accepted by God and transformed by God himself, that's incredible news. Praise God for solving our defilement problem. I'll see you back here for part 7 as we finish our series in the first half of the book of Mark.